Hey Warren, what's going on?
Another beautiful day, Kevin. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. Beautiful day. That was a perfect segue because I was gonna ask, where are you located? Where are you at?
Yeah, so I'm down in Cocoa Beach, Florida, where it's smoldering hot, and they've been launching a rocket a week.
Oh my gosh. I mean, is there water? I know there's of course water in Florida, but are you like on the coastline? Is there a beach nearby?
Yeah, I'm actually right across the street from the beach. Just did my evening dog walk down to the Cocoa Beach Pier. So
See, that's incredible when you're living a really smoldering hot state, but you have water nearby that you can, kind of, wet yourself off and just cool off. In Texas, it gets so hot, so humid, but I'm in Dallas where we're kind of surrounded by a lot of landmass, not a lot of water, So need to get out to where you're at, I think, and cool off.
you absolutely do. Beautiful beaches here. We're ready for you.
Awesome, man. Well, Warren, I was looking at your background, and this is going to make for a really great conversation today because obviously you have lots of experience when it comes to cultivation, but then also the consulting side when it comes to the actual regulations and kind of getting started as a business and what the pitfalls may be to look out for. I also think that I saw that you were a consultant in Hawaii, which I'd love to hear about. And I think that was before you started in your current position, which is VP of Regulatory Compliance at Cannaspire. So, Warren, I mean, let's get to know you. Let's let the audience hear a little bit about your background. So, tell us, the 15-year time span being in this space and what led you to Cannaspire today.
Absolutely. So I started as a cultivator back in Tallahassee while in my undergraduate, grew my way through a master's degree, and then very quickly realized that being a traditional market cultivator in Florida was a short lifespan sort of career. So I actually applied to go off to graduate school at Cal Berkeley to work on my PhD. And of course, I moved out west to Northern California. I was actually incredibly successful in my indoor cultivation. I vended product to Elemental Wellness and Harborside, and a few other very prominent Spark, Peace, and Medicine. Some large vendors in the Bay Area. Before I moved to Hawaii, I was operating I would call it a boutique farm of about 200 pounds a year in Santa Rosa, doing light depth, outdoor, and full sun, and some greenhouse projects. And then, of course, I got picked up by Hawaii. I started as a cultivation consultant, really just to help them do clean room hydroponic cultivation for their 60,000 square foot facility. But then they quickly learned that, hey, this kid's been in graduate school and he can actually write really well. So I helped them, develop their business license application. We made a promise to get jobs for displaced farm workers from, a hydroponic tomato farm that had gone under. So we basically took banana and tomato farmers and trained them up and got them working in that big facility in the east side of Big Island. And I also wrote all of their SOPs, so all of their employee handbooks, cultivation, dispensary, some IT, some security, and all of that got checked over by the Department of Health. Of course, they passed all of their inspections, and now currently they are number one in the state of Hawaii. They're the biggest and most successful cultivator, which it's partly because they did all indoor clean room hydroponic, right? Which really sets them apart from, all of the greenhouses and, mixed light and other projects that are happening in the state of Hawaii right now. So
Wow.
from there, I did a little bit of freelance work for, some different other technical writing outfits. And then I got picked up by Cannaspire to sort of ride this new wave of applications in New Jersey, New York, also Connecticut. We're seeing Mississippi coming on board. We've done a little bit of work in Illinois. It's really just all over the map wherever people need it. And in my capacity as Vice President of Regulatory Compliance, I do a lot of that same stuff that I just mentioned that I was doing in Hawaii, right? So business license application materials, environmental impact reports. That's actually something I did for Big Island Grown in Hawaii. So I learned how to do it for a big facility, much easier to do it on the application for smaller ones. Workforce development, diversification plans, and the full suite of SOPs, employee handbooks. And then, of course, my background as a college professor, that's really what I was training to do before I kind of jumped in both feet into the cannabis industry. I do a lot of employee training as well.
What were you gonna teach as a college professor?
So I was studying art and religion. And so really it would have been a combination of art history and religious studies courses. And I was doing my dissertation on the romantic character of Satan in British literature.
Wow, very
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, not your average cannabis skill set or background, but you'll find a lot of non-traditional paths in this industry, right? People like me who, back in my master's degree or my early 20s, I was like, man, cannabis in Florida, there's no retirement, there's no career for old growers here. But now I did all this work to become an academic, and it really seems like the cannabis experience actually is even more in demand than academia is right now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and it's really, it seems like it's been a culmination of 15 years of you just, I think, wearing different hats in this space and gathering the knowledge from various hands-on experiences to really inform what you're doing today.
So what I tell people is I really started in compliance in like 2016, running a warehouse, Prop 64. So it was, legal gray market, I would call it. It wasn't quite, a full licensed white market. But I sat down with a lawyer because we're like, man, we have all this product, all of these patients and all of their personal information. How do we make sure that we don't ever get knocked over and just run down? And, the lawyer explained to me that, look, compliance is all about creating a record of compliance. Everything you can do to show that you have been reading the law, you know what it is, and you've created a paper trail of every time you paid your taxes, every transaction that you made, every pound you grew, and every pound you sold. And so really you start in that record keeping realm, and the next thing you know, it turns out you're doing something that not a lot of people in the industry have done.
Is that, I mean, that kind of is a good lead to my next question, and that is, like, you talked about being in Hawaii and working with those operators where you actually handed over. I mean, you created the SOPs in different kind of verticals, right? So what what goes into that? I mean, it sounds like a lot, especially if you're doing that from scratch. So to your point earlier about kind of keeping record, did that really help as you could kind of reuse and adopt certain things that you had previously done? Or I mean, like, what's kind of your process going into that?
Each state is unique, is what I would say. So the ball game in California versus the ball game in Hawaii for compliance was totally different. Hawaii, they really sat me down with HAR 11850, the state legal code. They sat me down with all the business documents, and I did get some basic templates for like, hey, this is generally what we're looking for. So I had like some style guides, I would say. And then from there, I sat down with our master cultivator and we talked about what we were doing day in and day out in relation to what the state was going to be gathering data on. So how often do we need to print the metric reports? We need to store this data in the cloud and in a binder, because when they show up at the facility, you just want to hand them a binder. You don't want to have to say, sit here and wait for me to print something out real quick, or hey, can you take this tablet and look at everything? It's all stored in the internet. It's really about trying to facilitate that regulator's job and to help them know what's happening in every room of the facility. So at no point do they walk in and go, so what's happening in here, and how do I tell if what you're doing is actually in compliance with what the state has asked? So for instance, in Hawaii, you had to record every time you disposed of cannabis waste. So that means you have to have a camera set up, you have to have a pelletizer, and then it all has to fit through. And this is some strange law that probably they adopted from pharmaceutical, a number 4 mesh, which is like 4 centimeters wide or something. It's very silly because you're imagining all of this cannabis biomass that you then have to pass through a grate, and you have to do it on camera.
Right.
Well, so the best way is to create logs, right? Because a regulator's not going to sit and watch 10 hours of waste disposal to make sure that it was all going through the number 4. Instead, you're going to have an image of the mesh, an image of the trash site, and the SOPs for how you follow and do all of that. And then the regulator could sit and watch a few different random instances from your video and just check it right off and go, yep, there's everything that they said that they did. And it looks right on the video as well. So it's
Right.
really about expediting and facilitating the regulator to just save the facility time.
Right. And it's just it's this is things that they don't know, right? I mean, that they wouldn't know because they're just so preoccupied with running the day-to-day business, especially being a cultivator where, you really need to be hands-on with those plants to ensure they're healthy, they're growing, properly. So to your point, tactics like, taking a picture of the end product of it being disposed and maybe, during in the process and then at the start you can kind of expedite those processes instead of taking up data storage on your computer or cloud by holding these video files and then expecting the regulator to then watch them, which they're probably not. It just seems like a big waste of time. It's a good
Well, a good
example.
grower knows exactly what tasks he needs done. He may not be the best at writing them out in a way that's going to be that you could easily hand to somebody at an entry level and say, hey, this is how we do defoliation. This is how you identify the parts of the plant. I do recall there was an improperly trained cultivation tech. He was pulling nodes off the plant, which that's a bud site. So he was basically ripping off buds when he was supposed to be pulling fan leaves, right? So not knowing, this is where a well-written SOP that, has an image, it demonstrates the difference between a node and a fan leaf. It walks you through. It's something where you could quickly train somebody up to do the right thing and not have, oh my gosh, how long have you been ripping nodes off? You may have ruined this entire tray.
Right.
So it's really about ensuring your investment, but also making sure that the master grower's technique is followable. And if he disappears and leaves the job, you're going to keep going because you have all of these procedures written out and put in place.
Right. The next person you hire, you just hand them the handbook. You say, here you go, study this, we'll test you, we'll run through it, and you get started. That makes total sense. Now, here's my next question to that. And that is once the SOPs are in place and it's kind of the business is operating like a well-oiled machine at that point, it was state by state. We all know that, regulations, compliance are always changing. So, what would you say is the best way for these operators to stay up to date on all the changes happening at the regulatory level?
So there are really two strategies, right? I would say the big companies, they have a tendency to just hire a compliance officer, and it's somebody that sits at the top, usually a COO or somebody high up, that is doing nothing but dotting I's and crossing T's. CO2 monitors are all in place and they've been tested. All of the record keeping is in place. They're just going to be really thorough. Now, that being said, that's a really high level salary that you're paying for that individual when smaller companies can contract out compliance because, like you said, it's a moving target. New Jersey edibles aren't allowed now, but if Hawaii was any example, it only took 18 months for edibles to hit the market after they had initially banned them. So you kind of need somebody that's sitting, keeping their finger on the pulse so that, hey guys, you have a license, you're allowed to manufacture. Let's get the commercial kitchen going now because we don't want to miss out on these dollars. And oh, by the way, here's what the state wants for us to be able to report and record all of that stuff that we're doing in the kitchen.
Mhm. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about proper business planning. So, within every business, within any industry, having a solid business plan is key, right? I mean, because that's kind of your guiding light, your North Star starting out, especially when things can get busier, a bit chaotic. It kind of keeps you focused on your business objectives and where you want to be. So, my question to you is, how can entrepreneurs in this space build a proper business plan to help them maintain compliance, specifically compliance in the long term?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, business planning for compliance usually means doing some research on, say you're a dispensary, what's your POS system going to be? What's their track record, right? Because a lot of that is going to be recording your transaction data. It's going to be issuing your receipts. It's going to be helping you with ID verification, purchase limit verification. How much integration does it have? And then the state's probably going to require you to have BioTracker metric. So really, you're being tracked on two sides. Now, how does this go into the business plan? Well, the vendors that you use and the people that you partner with are going to either make it more difficult or make it more streamlined, right? So when building a business plan, really what you're looking for is who are you approaching? Are you trying to do this for investors? Are you trying to do this for the municipality? Or are you trying to do it for your state application? And I would say each one of those is like a different approach. If it's just for investors, you want to show the strongest ROI possible and then ensure that you've done your research to know what the state's going to require for you for compliance so that you're not going to get shut down or fined. If it's for the municipality, you want to show that really strong tax revenue. You want to show a record of giving back, something to where you have a really good community connection. And then on top of that, hey, we've paid attention to what your municipality's codes are, what your zoning is, and you're going to want to call that out. If it's for the state application, then it's your management's experience with compliance in other industries that are highly regulated. So, New Jersey is an example. Say somebody was a cannabis nurse for years, you'd want to say, they've been administering medications, they've been dealing with prescriptions, they've been already walking the walk of compliance in another industry that demonstrates that they're going to be a good steward of this cannabis license. So, really, it's about playing up that executive experience, demonstrating that they've researched and have an awareness of like the constellation of vendors out there. And then also just a strong financial model because no one wants to license a company that's going to go belly up in 6 months.
Speaking of licensing, I mean, you touched on a few key factors that businesses can do to position themselves uh, in a better position to obtain a license. Is there anything else that you would kind of add to that?
So definitely social equity, minority-owned businesses. Generally, I would call it reciprocity, right? These are the cultures that kept the cannabis market alive when it was underground, and now the state is recognizing that and trying to re-enfranchise individuals that previously have been harmed by the state laws. So Hawaii, we got a displaced, native Hawaiian farmer back into agriculture through the cannabis industry. New Jersey, if you have a cannabis arrest and no other disqualifying convictions, that's actually a good thing, right? Like you would almost never think, but hey, you've got a felony cannabis arrest and nothing else, buddy. We would like to get you a dispensary license. And then lastly, woman or disabled veteran or minority owned businesses, just because these individuals have not been traditionally represented within the cannabis industry, and it's time to share the wealth and turn it away from being an old boys club.
Right. No, yeah, absolutely. I mean, and then along the lines of obtaining a license, I would also imagine that the technical writing aspect is super important throughout that application process. And we kind of touched on that even before we started recording in terms of, our jobs, what I do and you do in terms of technical writing. So tell us a little bit about the importance of that when submitting a, quote unquote stellar cannabis licensing application.
So I would say that these regulators don't know cannabis as well as they possibly could. That just is a given, okay? So you are acting as the educator for the CRC or the OCM in New York or the DOH in Hawaii, whatever state it is you're in, you're trying to educate them what's going on in your facility. So it kind of is touching on what I referenced with the Hawaiian facility inspections, right? You don't want the DOH walking in and going, what's going on in each of these rooms? What is this type of manufacturing you're doing? Is it safe? Isn't it? You're going to be the one meeting with the fire department and meeting with the CRC and generally helping them understand what your business model is, where the potential issues could arise from, and what you've done to mitigate them and to plan ahead. So manufacturing class 1 division 1 extraction spaces are a really, really good example of very highly regulated, highly compliant rooms. You need what I call the panic at the disco button, basically the big red button that shuts down all the power to the room, spark proof plugs. It's an engineered space, but being able to put the time into that and develop it with the correct record keeping is going to do a lot to make sure your fire department and the CRC or whoever your regulating body isn't going to be shutting you down or fining you or having you lose time in production. So they understand what you're doing. They have a clear idea of what they need to be looking for.
Makes sense. Well, I recently had Jesse Campo Amor on, and he was basically integral negotiating the MRTA in New York, working for Governor Cuomo's office at the time, and eventually after that as well. And so we had an interesting conversation because it really was all about the New York legalization, like, everything that's going into it and the rollout. And I want to get your take on, the progress of the regulatory rollout in New York. What are the pros? What are the cons in your perspective, as it relates to regulations and the licensing applications?
So they have a lot of really good intentions for minority business owners and social equity applicants, also known as those previously impacted by state cannabis law. I worry that there are some clouds on the horizon because they have this large fund to help fund these businesses. And just whenever you have these sort of things, there are going to be individuals who win it and maybe shouldn't have won it. And then there are going to be individuals who deserve to win it and didn't get it. And potentially, I've seen in other states, this can lead to lawsuits, right? Like, why did you fund their dispensary and not mine? I'm more deserving. And so this is something where I feel like the OCM is still doing a lot of work to try and iron this all out. It's why they've kind of dragged their feet on everything, because there's a lot of work to be done in terms to figure out, the deserving quotient, right? Who gets it, who doesn't. I mean, so many people have been impacted by the laws in New York. There are a lot of social equity applicants, but they do have a high hurdle of having a strong business background. And having a strong resume that can demonstrate that, they're ideal candidates to operate this type of business. So it's tricky. I feel like there's a lot of good intention there. I think we're going to have to see how it actually plays out in real time.
Is there a way you may have done it differently? I mean, if they handed you a magic wand and you could just kind of wave it around and see it Warren's way, what would the social equity program look like?
So they would look at what the state market should be in terms of sales. They would try to figure out what they need to meet to license in terms of demand and supply, right? Like, how many dispensaries do we need to feed this market, right? And then you would take that estimate and try to issue a certain proportion of those to a certain amount of these candidates, right? And, maybe you do it by municipality and you say, look, we only have so many seats per municipality. two or three for, big operators that just want to go for it, and then four or five for the small guys that want to come in on the social equity and try to get their toe into the industry, because that's another problem, right? You've been impacted by state cannabis laws, you've got an arrest record, you're a minority potentially from, deprived socioeconomic background. How are you supposed to even afford this without some kind of help from the state?
Right.
So that's where I feel like setting up boundaries, hey, if you're in this municipality and they'll approve you, they have X amount to go around. That could actually help prevent this free for all with, right now they could have as many applications as possible, as many licenses. They kind of did that in California. They licensed any farm that wanted to go, and now it's 300 a pound for outdoor cannabis in Cali, and there are small farmers that are, falling by the wayside because the state didn't look at what they needed to produce for demand.
Right. Well, I mean, I'm glad you touched on California, because I wanted to ask you, outside of New York, I mean, are there any states that you've seen where adult use states where their regulatory rollout was, in your eyes, maybe successful or more successful than other states?
California was successful in that it got a lot of people licensed. It was unsuccessful insofar as they taxed it so heavily that
Right.
it brought the black market back in a really big way. Friends calling me up like, "We're getting 3,200 a pound again." Woo! Like, not the best thing. Yeah, right. Um, and it caused the demand to, or it caused the production to get overproduced, and then a lot of legacy farmers are suddenly feeling the pinch. Guys telling me that it's 300 a pound, it costs you $50 to get it trimmed, you're
Right.
making 250 to 200 a pound. It's barely worth your time.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, so outside California, anyone else any other state?
So I've been working in Connecticut a little bit, and they did a lottery. And the problem with the lottery is that how do you stop a big MSO from coming in and buying $1 million worth of lottery tickets,
Right.
right?
Right.
So it's not stacked, but it might be stacked. They bought all of the tickets.
I wouldn't say
Uh,
might. I would say it definitely is, right? Like that's what they're doing. I mean, they're business and they're going to go in and try to expand their footprint. And yeah, that totally makes sense.
Yeah, seriously. So that's, there are all these advantages and disadvantages. And this is something where, look, in New Jersey and New York, the open, anyone can apply, come on in, let's get down to business and see. It does give the state a lot of leeway to say, hey, you know what? You're a small guy with a big plan and the right social equity or minority or woman-owned background that we're looking for. You're the one that we want in there. So if they use that type of discretion, it could be really great.
Totally. Yep. Well, Warren, I mean, as we wrap up here, I want to give you the floor. Is there anything that we haven't covered that maybe you want to talk about or leave the audience with?
I would say, just generally speaking, that business owners that succeed at getting licensed, that actually do it, they have a strong vision and they follow it through to completion no matter what. So they agitate their city councils, they talk to multiple landlords. It is almost a full-time job just to start and keep the dream alive. And sometimes it can take a year or 2 years. Your license can get rejected and then sent back for revision. And, hey, it's only rejected, it's not denied. So, re-edit it and send it back. It's a process, and those with follow through have the tendency to make it to the end. If you've never done it before and you need some help with startup, talking to experts, consultants, technical writers that have this experience and can help you develop a really strong application or business plan, it will be worth your money and time in terms of, you having the time to go attend those city council meetings and do all the other 10 million things that I can't personally do for you from Cocoa Beach, Florida.
Right. Sound advice. Warren, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for your insights, man. Really enjoyed the conversation, as I know those listening and watching did as well.
Kevin, it's been a real pleasure being on your podcast, and I look forward to connecting with you further in the future.
Absolutely, man. And before we go, where can people find y'all's website and social media if they want to learn more about Cannaspire?
So we're www.cannaspire.com, and you could always email me at wharazz@cannaspire.com and learn more. And we do have a presence on LinkedIn and Instagram.
Awesome. And I'll be sure to put those links in the description box via YouTube as always. So look out for those. And Warren, thanks again, man. Let's do this real soon.
Absolutely. My pleasure, Kevin. Take care.
All right. And thank you all for listening. Bye.